moving ahead, we now have a presentation about palliative care in Kerala, the Pallium India experience. And we all know that Kerala, the palliative care in Kerala, and how it has grown and developed and has become an example for the world to follow. And so much to learn from Kerala. So Smriti Rana, whom I had the fortune of meeting in Salzburg in 2016, and the better fortune of meeting her here again. So Smriti is the Head of Strategic Programs and Partnership in Pallium India, Kerala. So Smriti, up to you.
Thank you. And I'd really like to thank our hosts for having us here today, INF and especially Dr. Dan, who kindly extended this invitation to us. Coming to Nepal has always been a homecoming, and I have always been incredibly proud of my Nepali heritage, but never more so than in the last 2 days that I've been listening to these presentations, and especially the presentations from this morning, which really moved me to tears. So thank you very much. I'm here today with a deep sense of gratitude for having this opportunity to share from the other side of the subcontinent. I'll start with this. It may seem odd to talk about a National Crime Records Bureau statistic, but in India, from 2014 and 2021, the second highest cause for suicide is amongst people living with serious illness. Now, there is no study that corroborates why this might be so, but application of mind will probably generate reasons why this statistic exists, and it's a real tragedy. One of the big travesties is also that healthcare, something that is supposed to alleviate and mitigate suffering, has become an instrument of afflicting more suffering on people. And 55 million Indians are pushed below the poverty line every year because of the cost of healthcare, of which 38 million is just because of cost of medicine. I'm just going to remind us all of the Astana Declaration around universal health coverage that says that quality healthcare should reach people where they are, when they need it, at an affordable cost. And health for all has to be health with all, and it has to include people in designing and controlling health systems. So we take a page out of this book, and some of the things that we do actually, go by those values. Dr. Roop Gursahani, who is a leading consulting neurologist at one of the big corporate hospitals in India, once had this to say, that modern hospitals are like fortresses. The poor can't get in and the rich can't get out. And this adds to the financial toxicity of what is experienced in the country. So how do we breach this divide? The Kerala palliative care model actually leverages social capital. And this is what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about now. We take healthcare, and like many people have said here, palliative care looks different in global south countries because adequate treatment does not reach people in time, and oftentimes they can't afford it, and people are expelled from the healthcare system. And so we cast a wider net in terms of who we reach in terms of palliative care. It's not just terminal illness or life-threatening conditions. Of the 526 palliative care services and centers that exist, 44.5% of the centers are in Kerala alone. Now, coming to Pallium India itself, we are a 21-year-old NGO, which was founded by Dr. Raj Gopal. We work on a demonstration, education, and facilitation model. We are a WHO collaborating center for training and policy on access to pain relief, and we have consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council. So when it comes to demonstration, basically what we're talking about is that what we teach, what we advocate for is something based on what we do ourselves. And so we have a center in Trivandrum, the Trivandrum Institute of Palliative Sciences, where this demonstration project exists. And we care for people with community participation. And through our demonstration site, we have inpatient services, outpatient services, home care, telehealth, and rehabilitation services. And we engage with the community, we partner with the community, and what they help us do is they help us with food assistance, vocational rehabilitation, education support, aids and assistive devices, government schemes, last mile linkage to government schemes, and home modifications. Now, some might say, is this palliative care? If we go by the definition of palliative care, which is the mitigation of serious health-related suffering, we know that the diagnosis of one person in one generation has multi-generational impact, not just on the physical health, but also on the emotional health, the social health, the financial health of the entire family. And therefore, if we are to mitigate serious health-related suffering brought about by a particular diagnosis, then we have to consider all these aspects, because all of this is impacted. Some folks here have been to Pallium India, and to me it's always a lovely moment in the morning when all our home care teams go out in different directions. We have home care teams going out every day in 9 different directions. And usually it's a multidisciplinary team that goes out, and we have a special physiatry team, we have a special mental health team. The terrain oftentimes looks like this. I know the terrain in Nepal is much more challenging, but oftentimes our nurses and our teams traverse these kind of terrains. And there you see Dr. Raj barefoot in someone's home. And so we really, meeting people where they are when they need it, this is pretty much it. How do we engage with the community? And this has been really the reason for success. Volunteers from the community engage with us, get trained in how to identify how palliative care needs, what palliative care needs might be. It might be an elderly woman living alone, it might be someone who's had spinal cord trauma, it might be someone with advanced cancer. And what they then do is a public space in that village becomes our link center. So what you're seeing here is a primary school. And behind that blackboard is a little examination room. Those who are well and able come here to collect their medication and to be checked. Those who are not, the most vulnerable, we go to see them at their home, and we are taken there by the volunteers who have joined us. So there's no point in giving out free medication when people are starving. And because of financial toxicity, we have a lot of people who don't have 3 square meals a day. So we also provide food kits to over 100 families who do not have any means of supporting themselves or to feed themselves. And here you see a volunteer leading one of our nurses to someone's home. And those are dry rations for a month. A big part of what dignity is who we are and what we can contribute in a meaningful way to our communities. And when people are diagnosed with a serious illness, oftentimes they're relegated to a corner of the house, to a room, they've been labeled as a patient, and they can no longer sort of contribute or do what they were doing earlier. But that has an enormous impact on their sense of self and personhood. So part of the work we do is vocational rehabilitation support. We have a lot of young women who have children with congenital anomalies, and in some societies they've been sort of ostracized. And suddenly you have a young woman who's not educated with a child who has high dependence needs, and she has no income. So we work with her to link her to a cottage industry program, perhaps. The gentleman you see there, he used to be an auto rickshaw driver, and he had an accident, and he has paraplegia. He became an umbrella maker, and if you've been to Kerala, you know we always need umbrellas. One of the biggest collateral damage areas is the education of children, because again, financial toxicity forces people to take their children out of school, reallocate those funds towards treatment cost. And what you then see is a multi-generational impact of lost opportunities, lost futures, and children who were in school have to drop out. So another aspect of the program is to support the educational needs of children who come from disease-ravaged families that have been financially destroyed. We have supported over 400 children so far. I'm very pleased to tell you that at least 10 of them have decided to choose medicine. And we look at who might be seen as invisible patients. When we visit people in their homes, say a 40-year-old man with advanced cancer and who has elderly caregivers, we do comprehensive geriatric assessments to ensure that we are tracking their mobility, their health indicators, so that you don't end up with 2 patients in the same home. And so that's one way of preventing suffering, which is also a mandate of palliative care. I'll just quickly tell you the story. We by one of our volunteers, we were directed to the home of this gentleman, this young man actually. When he was 19 years old, he met with a road accident. He had multiple injuries on his spine and head injuries as well. He was in the hospital for about 3 months, and then when he was discharged, his mother was told, bring him in for physiotherapy once a week, he should be okay. Straightforward. She was a single parent working in a rubber plantation. She needed daily wages to meet daily needs. In order for this boy to go to the hospital once a week, they lived in a house which had stairs, which he couldn't navigate. The house itself was on a hill. 4 men from the village would have had to take the day off to carry him down that hill, up another hill, down it, 500 meters to the nearest road where there was no bus stop. She would have had to hire an auto rickshaw, which would take her 30 kilometers in one direction, wait for the day and come back, and that was her week's wages. So did this boy get his physiotherapy? He didn't. And eventually one of the volunteers directed us to this household. When we found the house, this boy was extremely depressed, contemplating suicide. So we took care to his house, things like setting up parallel bars, doing physiotherapy. The physiatrist went, remodified the house a little bit. Again, I'm very pleased to tell you, 5 years on, this boy is working, he's walking, he's not depressed anymore, and he certainly wants to live. Fun fact, every year our home care teams in Trivandrum alone travel the equivalent of going around the earth 4 times to provide service to our patients. This is a calculation somebody did, one of our donors. In terms of education, we conduct in-person and virtual courses for doctors, nurses, allied healthcare professionals and volunteers. We do it in Trivandrum, and if someone needs it in their home state, we go across there. We put together a team of faculty and we go across there and train them in their settings. And in terms of facilitation, all of this that we do in Trivandrum serves as proof of concept, and we then use those to advocate for better policies. And so we work with international bodies as well as the central government of India. We work with the state governments, national health missions. We collaborate with private and not-for-profit organizations, and we help in catalyzing palliative care services by providing technical support. And we work very deeply in the area of opioid access, which means working with the central and state agencies. The Narcotic Drugs Act of India was amended in 2014 to make access to morphine more, to make it easier. It has been 10 years, and most states still don't know that the law was changed, so we go and conduct opioid availability workshops with all the stakeholders. And just by way of knowledge, India is the only country where opioid access comes under the Ministry of Finance and Department of Revenue and not Health. So it has a whole other layer of work for us to do. So till December 2024, we have been able to serve 27,684 unique patients, provided rehabilitation support to 14,000 plus patients. 7,638 people have been trained virtually through our different programs. Over 3,000 people have been trained in person. We have facilitated or provided technical support to 211 palliative care services in India alone. And at the moment, we are working across 28 states and 6 union territories of India. Just to round up, as part of the advocacy, I was telling some of our colleagues here today, there's a saying, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. So some of our work is also to get us off the menu. And these statistics, all of us know, these are difficult statistics that the needle hasn't really changed much. And you also know this map, which is, morphine consumption being a proxy indicator of palliative care services. All the erstwhile colonies are deeply emaciated in this cartography of pain, as Catherine Pettis calls it. So we all of us need to get together, work together. Our contexts are very similar. And we need to share our knowledge, we need to share our learnings and really sort of support each other in getting off the menu and getting a seat at the table. And finally, I'll just say that, we always have this debate about access versus control because narcotics, etc. And the debate is always between harm versus value, restrictive policies versus enabling policies. But balance is really to be found if we focus on the patient and the families. whether it's substance use disorders or whether it is palliative care access. And in order to do this, we have to focus on the suffering of individuals and families. Not just better access, but safe access through high-quality data on opioid use outcomes. We have brilliant examples where the models of care have actually shown that there is no misuse or diversion. This has happened in Kerala, in Telangana, in Uganda, and we must rely on those statistics and generate evidence of our own. And wherever these models have been successful, it has been where where there's been a partnership between government, the professionals, and the civil society groups. None of these three can work on their own. We need to partner together. We need the expertise of professionals and the advocacy and the quality control that civil society brings, and the mighty infrastructure of government. And so we need to push for that. So just some, many folks from here have visited us in Pallium India, which to me is such a healthy sign of collaboration, and we've been delighted to host them in Pallium, and I hope that through these collaborations we can really strengthen better access to palliative care in South Asia together. So thank you very much. I will stop with that.
Thank you, Smriti, for that wonderful presentation and also for the wonderful work you're doing, setting an example for the world in Kerala, so that, and thank you for all the help that you're also providing us to take palliative care forward. So thank you so much.